All right, Audacity in 3, 2, and 1.
Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Lynn, and I'm here with my co-host, Marissa Roy. And in today's episode, we're going to discuss kind of how to break through a weight loss plateau. So we'll get into that in a little bit. We have not any huge major updates for you guys, but just kind of chat with y'all a little bit before we get started.
Yeah, thank goodness. I don't think I could handle another big, huge update.
No, not right now.
Yeah, but so we just got back from another weekend out of town because apparently that's all we do. But we went to go visit Aaron's, one of his closest friends from high school over the weekend because he also got engaged and has a house, and Aaron's never met his now fiance. And so we got to hang out with them. Honestly, they're outside of Raleigh, and we just kind of chilled most of the weekend. Like, we grilled, we cooked in, and we binge watched the whole season 3 of You. Like, we just literally relaxed, and it was pretty much exactly what I needed, I think.
Have you seen the first 2 episodes or the first 2 seasons?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure that you were like not just watching it during season 3.
Oh no, I'm very up to speed on You.
Okay. I finished episode 4 last night. So I am very proud of myself because normally when my husband is out of town and there's a show that I'm watching, I have such a bad addictive personality, and I'm just like, oh, just one more. Oh, just one more. And I know that like I'm not alone in that, but I think it like I don't know, I kind of make any excuse to like have it on in the background, like, oh, I'll just meal prep and then I'll watch this whole show, or oh, I'll just have it on in the background when I do this. And so I get really, really bad. So the fact that I've been able to like watch a couple and then okay, let's go to bed at a reasonable hour. We're not staying up till midnight. So I'm very proud of myself for doing that with this season.
Yeah. We actually, we watched like 3 or 4 of the episodes, I think, on, was it Friday, the night it came out? And then on Saturday, we went to the wine festival, and then we went to this place for dinner called Parker's. And it's like this super old school, like adorable barbecue spot. And it's like you walk in and you feel like you've been transported back in time, like 30 years. It was so cool. But basically they close at 6:30. And so like we had to make sure we left the wine festival, got to that restaurant in time to make sure that we ate before they closed. So then we came back to the house after, because we were like, well, what do you want to do? I don't know. We can just chill. So we're like back at home at like 7. And so we just like start an episode, and like we're 3 or 4 episodes in, and we're like, oh my gosh, it's only like 9, or it's only like 9:30, 10. Let's keep going. So we just powered through and watched all of it.
Oh my gosh, on that one night?
Like probably 6, like at least 5 or 6 of the episodes. Yeah.
So what time did you go to bed?
Like midnight.
Oh wow. I feel like that's late for you, but I feel
it
like on the
is,
weekends your sleep schedule is not like it is during the week.
It depends on the weekend. If I'm home, it's absolutely the same.
Yeah.
And if I'm not home, then that's like where it kind of deviates. But I think it was definitely worth it because man, I want to talk about it, but I won't.
Yeah. So I feel like if you haven't watched it, the first episode is like, wow, like they really like don't waste any time getting into it.
Yeah. That's what I was like, oh shit, okay, this is all happening already. Great. Love it.
Yeah. But super, super funny characters, like the social, because they're in California. So I think it's very funny, like the social media stars and influencers and stuff. And
I think it's so funny how they like play on like keto and intermittent fasting and macros. I don't know if you got to that episode yet, but there's one where like this isn't
when they're grilling.
No, it was in the bakery, so this doesn't like spoil anything, but Love was like, here, have this like scone or whatever it is she made, and it was like there's 3 different people, and she was like, oh, sorry, I don't eat carbs, and the next one was like, oh, I already hit my macros, and the next one was like, sorry, I'm IFing. And I was like, oh my god, this is hilarious.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Well, I don't really have any updates other than on Thursday, we'll be at 21 weeks pregnant. We just had our anatomy ultrasound. So that was really cool. It was like a very, very in-depth ultrasound, and they go through all the anatomy of your baby, and they take a bunch of measurements and just trying to see if everything is measuring up to speed. And they will put the estimated weight of your baby, which I just think is so crazy that they're able to do that just from an ultrasound, that they can estimate how much they weigh. So they're estimating him to be about 13 ounces. He's measuring ahead of schedule by like maybe 4-ish days. So they will move your estimated due date up or down depending on how they're measuring, but they always say that the due date that they give you at the very beginning based on your last menstrual period is probably going to be your most accurate. So they say that it will change throughout your pregnancy, but it makes sense if you think about it, that if you have two babies at 6 weeks versus 36, like at 36 they're going to vary a lot more than at that 6-week mark. So I just thought that was super interesting. So I'm learning so much about pregnancy during this time, but that was super fun. But I also thought that like every single time you'd go to an appointment that you'd have an ultrasound done, and that's not the case. It's like normally just 2. You're one at around like 12 weeks, and then you're 20 week, and then normally, unless there's something wrong or something that they want to monitor, you don't really have any other additional ultrasounds unless you opt to do like a 3D ultrasound. And I don't know if that's covered by insurance or anything, but my husband, I was showing him 3D ultrasounds and he had no idea. Like he's like,
I've never heard of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So 3D ultrasounds, it's, you can see like a 3D version of your baby. And so it's been really cool. Like you can have a picture. Like a lot of people do this, they'll have the 3D ultrasound, and then when their baby is born, and they'll compare the pictures, and they're like spot on. It's very weird.
That's terrifying.
Yeah. So it's funny, when my parents were in town, my dad and my mom were telling me that when they were going through my pregnancy and my brother's pregnancy, that they would do the ultrasounds, and he was like, yeah, the doctor would just be like, oh, it just looked like a little blimp on a weather map. And he'd be like, that's your baby. And they're like, what? And he's like, so looking at the ultrasound pictures nowadays, he's like, it's crazy how much they can see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's it for me.
How big is he now? As big as a banana, did you say?
Yeah. So our last update at 20 weeks was big as a banana.
Nice.
And so the app that I use is called the Bump, and they give you all these really cool updates and like fun facts. So yesterday, the fun fact was your baby's hand is as big as, or your baby's palm is as big as a Altoid.
What?
An Altoid.
Oh, like the mint?
The little mints. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's just like weird little like fun facts like that.
That's fun.
Yeah. But I guess we can jump into our topic for today. So we were discussing again kind of what we wanted to talk about today, and we really like the idea of talking about weight loss plateaus and how to kind of break through those plateaus. So I guess I kind of want to start it off by saying that weight loss plateaus when you're dieting are pretty common. So it's not that you're doing something wrong or that your metabolism is broken. I mean, we've spoken many, many times about things like that, but if you are dieting, more than likely you will experience a plateau at some point during your dieting phase. And so what we're going to talk about today is things that you can do to break past them, continue dieting, and then also give you an idea of maybe when it is time to stop dieting, and then what you can do after that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the next thing that I want to definitely touch on when it comes to just a perspective on plateaus, like one, they're going to be common. And then two, I don't know, like I don't think it's a really different perspective on plateaus, but I feel like I phrase it differently. But like, not that they don't exist, but most of the time a plateau that someone is experiencing is usually solved by just figuring out what variable they're overlooking that they haven't already paid attention to. So we're going to go over those first. And like, I did a post on Plateau Breakers the other day that did really well, I think, because of that. So the first thing, of course, is you have to be being adherent. And if you're not actually sticking to your diet or your training, then you can't expect to see results. And here's the thing, guys, like, as much as I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, most people get stuck here. And like, if you are struggling with a plateau, but you are restricting on the weekdays and overeating on the weekends, and you're like, well, I'm being so good 5 out of 7 days per week, why am I not seeing results? It's probably because of that. And so like, there's the majority of cases that I run into with new clients, which is people that I talk to, is there is most likely an issue here with like, we just need to figure out something that you can stick to. And oftentimes that means getting away from extremes of 1,000 calorie or 1,200 calorie diets and getting into a more sustainable deficit. So like, something that is not, not starving, but still, below whatever your total daily energy expenditure is. So that'd be the first thing for sure.
Yeah, so that reminded me of my very first prep that I ever did back in 2015, that I had been tracking macros up to that point, and I thought that I was pretty adherent to my macros. And especially when I was in prep, I knew that I needed to be like close with my numbers. So I thought I was being pretty accurate. And it wasn't until I started actually logging my food intake and looking at what I was eating day to day, week to week. And my coach pointed out, he's like, yeah, you're being pretty adherent for the most part. But if you look at your fat intake, if your macro goal is 55, well, some days you'll have 70, and then some days you'll have 60, and some days you'll do, 50. And it wasn't until I really started to get a lot closer with my macros, the more progress that I saw. But it wasn't until I saw that visual of, wow, I'm actually not being as adherent as I thought I was. So yeah, I love that you kind of said like, hey, we really need to look at some other factors first before we say, is this a true like weight loss plateau?
Right. Because the main thing too is like, a lot of times I'll kind of run into the scenario with clients where, like you said, it's like, oh, they feel like they're being consistent, but then we look at the numbers and it's like one day is over, one day is under. And it's like, well, on average, I'm hitting this fat intake. It's like, yes, but the day to day is just like kind of all over the place. And, we need to see that consistency overall. And it's a difficult question to answer when it comes to breaking these fat loss plateaus, because more often than not, the answer to breaking the plateau is dial something in more. And there's just like, we have to kind of take into account the mental strain of that and figuring out what can this person tolerate and what is going to be realistic for this person to actually stick to. Because not only is there physical strain of like, okay, your body doesn't want to eat 1,200 calories, so it tells you to binge on the weekends, but also the mental strain of like tracking every little thing that goes into your body, weighing everything to the gram, like that sort of stuff can get taxing. So it's important to really look at the bigger picture of like, okay, I'm in this fat loss phase. It is temporary for this number of weeks. So I can, dial this in more and tolerate this added stress a little bit more with being more accurate, whether that means, keeping your fat within a range of 5 grams above or below your target, or, dialing something in a lot closer. Now, I will say, I don't think it's necessary to hit your macros to the gram, to the T every single day to see progress. I've done that before. And I've only done it in prep, to be honest. And I don't think it's necessary. I've had clients who have done that. And while it's great to like show yourself that like, wow, I can be spot on if I really try to, I don't think it's necessary. So oftentimes I think, Christina, we operate the same way, I think, but I won't speak for you, but we give our clients ranges rather than like single target numbers. So instead of like 50 fat, it'll be, 45 to 55. And so that way it's like, if you're within that range, that's plus or minus 5. And so you're within that target range. Carbs and protein, I tend to be a little bit more liberal with it. So like, instead of 200 carb, I might say 190 to 210. If you're within that, then it's like,
That's
what?
Exactly. Those are my exact ranges.
Yeah. So exactly, like just 20 grams total. So like 10 above and below. So if you're within that, like that is consistent. And I know that the app that I use with clients to track their diet now, they actually don't have like that close of a range. So it's like you set the macro target and you either get to pick between like 10%, 20%, 30% variance. So that's 10% above or below whatever that target is. So it actually is a little bit wider of a range that the app is defining as adherent, giving a little bit more wiggle room. But it just goes to show like, yes, we need to be consistent, but do you need to drive yourself nuts, making sure that it's exactly on the target? Probably not, but you got to be close.
Yeah. So the other thing I was thinking about too is we do have a lot of times that clients will say, like you mentioned, hey, yeah, I vary day to day, but on average, I'm hitting my macro targets. And while that's better than being all over the place, still having that day-to-day variance, what I often see with clients is they have a huge range of fluctuations with their weight, with how they weigh in every single day. And a lot of times when they get more consistent day to day, their weights will kind of stabilize a little bit. And so that's one of the things that we see. And so they actually might see a drop in their average, but not necessarily anything has really changed a whole lot other than just being a little bit more consistent. And so it's kind of almost like gives your body's not just like, well, what are we going to eat today? Like what's going to happen today? It's like they just kind of have a little bit more pattern, I guess. I don't know how to really explain it more than that.
Yeah, I mean, there's just something about predictability and like having consistency. And I can't sit here and say that there's research behind this or like anything like that. But what I've seen in practice is exactly what you said. It's like, it's almost like a stress response from the body. Like if you're the type of person where like one day you're eating from sun up to sundown and you're just like ravenous all day long. And then the next day you're like, oh, I'm not hungry. So you don't eat till 3 p.m. And then you just eat all your food in one sitting. Like that's going to elicit a stress response from your body, because it's going to be like, okay, I'm starving today. And then the next day, okay, well, I guess we're eating all day today. And then the other thing too is like, with those types of patterns, you are perpetuating your body to have these fluctuations. Because if you say, for example, eat a bunch of food late at night, you wake up the next morning, you're not hungry. Well, duh, you're not hungry. Like you're probably not going to want to eat until 3 p.m. that day because of how much you ate right before bed. And then you're just going to perpetuate that irregularity, that cycle of like crazy like fluctuations with that. And of course, with your weigh-ins, but also just like with your appetite signaling, with your hunger, with your body's stress and response to hunger. And it's not promoting just overall consistency, not only in when and where you get your calories from, but consistency in your habits. Because when it comes to macros, we've talked about this a number of times, it's not just about hitting the targets at the end of the day, but it's about making sure that, you actually have the habits, like eating a well-rounded breakfast, eating a well-rounded lunch, having a good pre-workout meal, post-workout meal, dinner, those sorts of things, so that when you stop tracking macros, you don't just resort back to not knowing what to do, right? Because you have to have those habits established.
Yeah. And I think, so the big thing is adherence. So make sure you are being consistent with your nutrition, and not just for 1 week, not just for 2 weeks, but for a long period of time. And one of the things I think we should have mentioned kind of at the beginning is, we've talked about your expectations for fat loss and kind of what to expect. And, on average, you should be losing about 1% of your body weight per week. And so anything more than that, you're going to be dipping into muscle. So a lot of times clients want to see results sooner and sooner. And we're the same way. When we're dieting, we'll message each other and we get pissed when things aren't moving quick enough. But we just have this expectation that every single day, if you're dieting, the scale will go down every single day, slowly, slowly, slowly. But that's not their reality. So fat loss and weight loss is not linear. So you're going to see fluctuations in your weight day to day. You might even have 1 week where your weight is up on average. That doesn't mean that you've hit a plateau. So kind of defining what that might look like in a dieting phase. So let's say, your weight is up. So a lot of times if you do have a coach, we'll sit there and we'll try to figure out, hey, what could have caused this weight spike this week. So we'll take a look at a lot of different factors, like your sleep. What was your stress looking like? What was your food quality like? How was your digestion? All of these different things will kind of tap into things and say, hey, okay, this is what I feel like we need to focus on this week. Let's see what happens this upcoming week once you kind of get a handle on that. And then if your weight stays the same or it stalls, and it maybe stalls again for a second week, then yeah, we might have hit a weight loss plateau. So if your weight stalls just for a little bit, it doesn't mean, oh my gosh, I've hit a plateau and I need to listen to this podcast and figure out what I need to do. Oftentimes it's just kind of resetting, figuring out what you need to do and spending a couple more weeks. And if your weight stays stagnant, then yeah, there's a good probability you are, and then you can implement some of these strategies that we'll talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I really pulled from that and that I like to talk about with clients a lot is like, how do we define the plateau? How do we define maintenance, which like essentially those should be the same thing. And then how do we define weight gain versus weight loss? And so it's like day to day, you're going to have fluctuations. So like any day to day, oh, my weight was up for 3 straight days and then it came back down. That's not a plateau. That's a fluctuation. And then like in the bigger picture too, week to week, you're going to see the trends. And so really when we're defining a plateau, we're defining maintenance. We're not talking about 1 week, my weight stayed the same. It's so 1 week, your weight is in one spot. I'm not going to say here because not everyone's watching on YouTube, but your weight is in one spot. The next week, maybe it goes up. After that week, does it go up again or does it come back down or does it stay the same? And so basically what we're seeing is like 1 week, mid-range, 1 week up, 1 week up, 1 week up. Of course, that is weight gain. Same thing with weight loss, right? If we see average 1 week is in one spot, the next week it comes down, next week it comes down, or even, once it's in one spot, it comes down, it stays there for a little bit, then comes down again. That's still an overall trend of weight loss. And that's multiple weeks. So that what I just described could be 4 to 6 weeks of overall time, right? And then weight maintenance, again, is the same thing. It's like, are we hovering around a certain midpoint or are we consistently seeing raises or upwards or downward movement in where the scale is going over like 4 to 6 weeks? And that doesn't mean you necessarily have to wait that long to define or act on a plateau, but just to show like really how we see these trends over time as coaches. We aren't just looking at the micro of like day to day, week to week, because like, for example, as women, we have 2 weeks of the year and a day in the middle of the first 2 weeks of the month. Did I say year? First 2 weeks of the month and 1 day in the first 2 weeks of the month that our weight is just totally unpredictable, unreliable, because the whole luteal phase is just like, okay, we can maybe expect some reliable weigh-ins, but definitely some water retention, some bloating there. And then the day that we ovulate, there's usually a 2 or 3 pound spike that day too. So it's like,
frustrating.
We have like basically 2 solid weeks in a month that we are seeing reliable weigh-ins as a woman. So that can be something that throws it off. So like if we have to look at our progress, sometimes I will be looking at the past 6 weeks for someone because of that, to just see like, okay, outside of these periods, like where are we at here? So just wanted to touch on that before we go into, like you said, sleep, water, stress, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Those would be the next thing for plateaus.
So when it comes to tracking your cycle, and I've talked about this on a previous podcast before, but that's one of the reasons I love tracking your cycle and getting that data, because it makes it just a little bit easier when you do see that fluctuation. You're not like, oh my gosh, all my progress is ruined, I'm bloated, da 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 da. You can say, hey, look, if we go back to last month and the month before that, your weight will come up 2 to 3 pounds. It'll stay elevated for, 4 or 5 days, and then it comes right back down. And you've been continuously making progress, and then this is what's going to happen again. So it makes it a little bit easier on the client. And again, as me as a coach, it's like, hey, this is just a trend. This is what's going to happen. We just need to stick it out, keep doing what you're doing, maybe drink a little extra water. But other than that, you're going to be fine. And so what I see from my clients, and I'm sure it's the same with you, is after we've been working together for a long time, it used to kind of be like, my weight is up, I don't know why. And, a couple months in, they'll be like, hey, my weight's up, but I think it's because I'm on my period and I'm feeling a little bit bloated. And they start to make that association. So it's not as like, oh my gosh, I'm freaking out. Help me. What's wrong? It's just like, hey, this is probably why. And so I love that they're able to think about the data and kind of say, well, what is my body telling me, or what is the trend?
Right. And that's what you need to learn. And whether you learn it with yourself or with a coach, sometimes working with a coach helps you to basically bridge those gaps a little bit easier. So really being able to just have that knowledge of like, okay, how does my body actually work? How does my body respond? Because I'm thinking of one client in particular, actually, just one, who her weight is like the most stable thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And it's so weird. Like I tell her like probably once a month that her weight is so weird, because if we're in a gaining phase, it's like average up by 0.2 every single week, and like there's no fluctuations. And then if we're in a weight loss phase, same thing. It's just like do like easy, like step down little by little, week by week. And that is it's funny because that's how people expect things to be.
Yeah.
But it is so abnormal. I tell her, what are you fudging these numbers? Like, but she's
I
not
have an
like
idea of who it is, but I don't want to say.
But yeah, it's freaking crazy. So yeah, that's like an anomaly. So really when it comes to weigh-ins, if you look at a graph of your weight, which is what I love about like plotting data, I'm looking at everything, you're going to see a very jagged line with lots of spikes, lots of dips. And what you want to see is just an overall downward slope on, like, if you were to, for example, calculate a line of best fit, that would be a negative slope. And so just bringing some math into that, but really just like you want to see that slight downward trend, or sometimes even I'll have clients who are really frustrated, and then we'll look at their graph for the past 3 months, and it's like, oh no, this is a very steep downward trend. It's just been like 1 or 2 weeks of like kind of chilling in the same spot. So sometimes just taking a zoomed out perspective can really help with that too.
Yeah. And so something else to think about is typically the more you lose, the more weight loss will slow down. So
Yeah.
we might see a big weight loss in the beginning, and then we don't continue that same pace as we finish out our diet. And it makes sense. If you start off at, let's say 170 and you're losing 1% of your body weight, if you get down to 150 or 140, of course, that's a lot of weight loss, but your 1% has changed. So the amount of weight that you should be losing will slow down. So that's also something to think about, is how you start off your diet is not going to be how you end your diet. And the other thing too, is typically in the beginning of a dieting phase, you'll lose, if you're doing everything correctly, you should see a lot of water weight come off first. And you might see a lot in the beginning, and then again, it'll just kind of slow down. And then I also feel like it's important to point out that losing weight typically gets harder the closer you get to your end goal. So I feel like a lot of people kind of struggle with like the last 5 pounds. Like those are the hardest to get off. And again, we'll talk more about like when should you end your diet, but typically, again, that is kind of the hardest part of the diet, is like right at the end.
Right. Physically and psychologically, because if it's just 5 pounds, there's a good chance you're pretty content with where you're at already. And
Right.
so it's even harder to justify all the sacrifices when you're already feeling so much better. So then that's, again, yeah, like you said, we'll talk about the point at which where you decide, okay, do I need to push for this? Or, can I just kind of call it here? I've been in that position time and time again. But yeah, let's talk about the other plateau breakers first, and then we'll get into that and when to make that call.
Okay. Do you think we should talk about maybe like why your weight loss plateaus? Like,
I guess like in the context of each of those things.
okay.
Right. So
Yeah.
the first one, like, so we mentioned sleep, non-exercise activity, hydration, stress, meal distribution. So we're going to go over basically how these things can cause plateaus, and then how do we remedy them. The answer to some will be very clear and simple. For example, sleep. If you are not sleeping well, it will impair your fat loss and your weight loss. And I've used this example a number of times, but there was actually a study done out of I think it was wherever Bill Campbell's lab is, I think. And they published a study, either they published or they reshared. I can't remember. But basically it was a study of 2 groups doing a fat loss phase. one was sleep deprived, one was not. They were both resistance training, tracking macros, doing all the things, right? And basically the group that was sleep deprived lost, I think it was 40% more of their weight from lean tissue rather than from fat. So like basically you're recovering, you're making sure you're retaining your muscle, you're making sure that the weight that you lose is from fat during the sleep recovery that you're getting. So if you're depriving yourself of that over and over and over again, and of course there's situations where maybe you can't control it as much, hint, hint, new mothers, but like really like trying to remedy that as much as possible, or get as best sleep that you can in the context that you're in. I'm thinking of one client in particular who her daughter has like a ton of like different medical issues that keep her up like at night. And so really it's like, how do we maybe squeeze in a nap here and there rather than like getting 8 straight hours of sleep? But like, again, just how do we make that a little bit better than it is?
Yeah, I have a couple clients in mind. One of them, same thing. She had an issue with her dog and she was having to administer medication and having to get up, and same thing, new puppies, new babies.
Yeah.
And then I have another client of mine who is a 24-hour nurse. So sometimes she has to be up for prolonged periods of time. So that will affect her sleep. So I always have her on her weight log. She'll indicate when she was at work those days. So I can kind of get an idea of how that might affect her weight for that day or that week.
Yeah. And then like, for example, Erin worked night shifts 10:30 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. for 4 years. So like that impacted a lot of like hormones, body fat, like cravings, appetite, mood, like everything. So like really sleep depends on a lot, or sleep really does dictate a lot. A lot depends on sleep is what I was going to say. So as best you can, try to make that a little bit better. I guess some rapid fire tips for sleep is your room temperature, 68 to 70 degrees, keep it dark, have white noise, weighted blankets can help, being just comfortable, lowering your body temperature before bed. So taking a hot shower can really help. And having some sort of a consistent wind down routine that doesn't rely on screens before bed is really helpful too. And then this will go into stress as well, but the one supplement that like I feel comfortable talking about when it comes to breaking plateaus is ashwagandha. And that is basically an herb that helps to reduce total cortisol, or just regulate cortisol, which is your stress hormone. So if you're chronically stressed, cortisol will go up at night instead of come down, and that prevents you from falling asleep or staying asleep. So ashwagandha can really help with that, especially for shift workers. If you are a shift worker and you're not already taking ashwagandha before bed to help with sleep, it can absolutely change your life. It definitely changed Aaron's, and he was able to at least sleep through the day for 3 or 4 years with that. So that can be something that really helps regulate stress, water retention, and improve sleep quality as well, which will then in turn be quote unquote a fat burner, but not directly.
Yeah, and the other thing I was thinking about is not only does sleep dictate a lot of those things, but also your hunger. So we talked about it before, but ghrelin and leptin, so it'll affect that. So typically what happens is a lot of people, and I've absolutely, I feel like this is in college when I would stay up cramming for an exam. The next day I'd be so hungry, and your body is trying to get additional energy, and it is also signaling that, hey, I'm hungry. And so you might have a effect where you're not getting enough sleep, and then you're overeating the next few days, which can obviously, of course, affect your adherence and your macros. So something else to pay attention to.
Yeah. So there have been studies to show that even just one poor night of sleep can affect your balance of ghrelin and leptin. So being hungrier, not getting full as easy. And if it doesn't affect your adherence in the short term, it could affect cravings and just like those things building up throughout the week as well.
Yeah. So another thing, and we really harp on NEAT quite a bit, but that's your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is basically just any type of movement outside of exercise. So typically it's, just steps or your overall daily activity. So we like to think about this a lot. And I feel like Marissa is a really good example of this. When we go and talk about her prep, she was doing 2 hours of cardio a day, but outside of that didn't move because she felt like she was being so active. Whereas if she had got up and moved a little bit, maybe and probably had to force herself to move at that point, she probably would have seen some better results when it came to her weight and weight loss. So something to think about is, we have this idea that if I work out and if I do a cardio session, then therefore I've done my activity levels for the day. I've been super active and I've burned all these calories, but a lot of calories that you burn throughout the day comes from just that getting up from your couch and moving around or going on a walk, like all of those things, maybe cleaning your house a little bit. So something to keep an eye on. And that's why Marissa and I do keep a step count for our clients to make sure we're getting a minimum number every single day. So again, we're keeping that factor at a consistent level.
Yeah, totally. Man, in hindsight, every time I bring that up, I'm like, in hindsight, I just wonder how much more progress I would have seen. Cause like the only reason the cardio got that high was because nothing was happening, because I was like basically compensating all my energy that I was using in cardio to like veg on the couch afterwards. So if in hindsight, I knew that and I took control of that and like, again, cleaned up my place because God, it needed it. But really just like use that energy to like continue moving. I don't even want to know how much more progress I could have made. It's like frustrating to think about, but everything happens for a reason. Big learning experience there. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about NEAT, so I'm not going to really add anything to that, but have a general idea of daily movement. And if it's not a lot, increase it, especially like outside of the gym.
Yeah. So that's something kind of too, sometimes with my clients is maybe I don't change their macros. Maybe I don't change their cardio, but I might just say, hey, from this point forward, instead of getting 7,000 steps, let's bump it up to 8. Let's see what that does, if that does anything. And I have some clients who will tell me like, hey, I have a desk job. I'm not able to get up and move that much, just for whatever reason, they have to be at their computer and they're not able to take breaks. And if I have a step goal for them of 8,000 or 9,000, they're like, I'm doing 45 minutes to an hour of cardio every single day just to get my steps in. This is not realistic for me. And I'm like, all right, awesome. Thank you for that feedback. Let's bump it down. And actually, instead of this, let's change your food a little bit. Yeah. So it's being realistic with yourself. And is this something I can change? Is NEAT? Can I get it higher? It's like, yeah, I can implement a 20-minute walk before I go to work every morning. Not a big deal. And boom, you can get your steps up a little bit. So that's something to take a peek at. And yeah, not to harp on for a long time because we have an entire episode on it. I don't remember what episode number 8. So check out somewhere around there, but it's a really good episode to listen to.
Yeah, I was actually talking to someone yesterday about that. I was like, basically you have a choice. It's either we increase time or we decrease food. And it's like time is the movement, time you spend walking. And so it's like, what would you rather do in that position? Right. So hydration. So this is a pretty simple one, I would say, but if you don't drink enough water, you can easily hold water and just kind of hold water weight retention and all that stuff, especially if you are someone who eats a little bit more kind of processed foods. I will say personally, like Aaron and I have both really been struggling with like just the uptick and like our work being able to meal prep. And so like we have been relying on some of the like for lunch, for example, deli meat sandwich kick, because it's so easy to just slap 2 pieces of bread together with some meat. But of course that has tons of sodium, right? So it's like, if I'm not drinking water and I'm eating those sorts of things, or we're eating out a little bit more to, be able to just have the convenience aspect with our diet, then I need to make sure I'm hydrated. Otherwise, I'm going to be just holding that extra water weight. So the more you drink, the more you flush. Water helps with digestion. So if you're constipated, drink more water. A lot of things, but things will work regularly when you're drinking enough. I will say, getting this hydro jug that I've been drinking out of this whole episode, big game changer, because I was being really lazy before and drinking out of a 32-ounce Naglene. And while that's still a big water bottle, I don't get up to fill it up and I've talked about this on the podcast before, like I will literally just tunnel for like hours of time at this desk. So if I don't have something that can last me those 3, 4, 5 hours that I'm in a tunnel for, it's like, it's not happening. So this has been super helpful. Highly recommend Hydro Jug. It's actually a lot more like durable feeling than I thought it would be. Yeah.
I fill up a gallon every single day. And so I pour from that, which I think you do too. So it's because it's I've tried this before where I'll be like, oh, well, I'll just fill my water bottle up 3, 4 times,
6 times
a day. Yeah. And I'll get my gallon. But again, I just didn't fill it up, and I would just be like, oh, well, I guess I'm out of water. So I just pour from my gallon. I take it with me everywhere. And I'm not as strict when I'm in my off season. I still am though, because I like to just have my water. But when I'm in prep, I bring that with me everywhere. And it's just a really good, from every episode, you can probably gather, I'm a very visual person, and it's just very easy for me to just pour from my gallon, see how much I have left for the day, kind of get a good idea of like, okay, I probably need to start chugging a little bit of water, so I'm not doing this at the end of the night and having to get up 3, 4 times in the middle of the night to go pee.
Don't do that.
No. So you should typically cut off water. Would you say like an hour before bed, 30 minutes?
Yeah, even so, like I really just like to emphasize like front loading. So like getting as much water as you can in, excuse me, at the beginning of the day. Like it just makes your life so much easier when you knock out a good chunk. So like there was a good stretch of time where I was knocking out my full gallon by like 2 or 3 p.m. And then I just like wouldn't even have to think about water for the rest of the day. That's a little bit more like, that's definitely pushing it. But like, for example, right now, I'm just trying to get my half gallon done, like, by a decent hour. And then like, you don't have to stress about like chugging it at dinner time or whatever, because that can be so annoying, added stress. And just like, again, we don't want to be waking up in the middle of the night to pee.
Yeah. So moral of the story, drink your water. It cures all your problems.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Cool. Stress is my favorite. So we talked about ashwagandha and how that can impact stress management, sleep. So stress will greatly impact everything that goes on. Stress being high, acutely, chronically, can impact your emotional response. I think that's the number one thing that I see in clients is like, if there's a really stressful situation going on, it's like typically the go-to response for a lot of people is to shut down, to stop doing all the things. And so it's like, how do we change that response to be a little bit more productive, right? Or just like making sure you take care of the baseline things. Like it doesn't have to be hitting your macros perfectly, but what about keeping your protein up? It doesn't have to be hitting a gallon of water, but let's just make sure we stay kind of hydrated, in these stressful situations, and not let everything about yourself go out the window, right? So dealing with stress is definitely a complex issue. I feel like we could do a whole episode on stress management. That's a good idea. Yeah. Let's write that down. But yes. I mean, where do we even start with that?
I don't know. I feel like there are so many different examples and I think a lot of times too, one of the things I'll talk to my clients about is stress perception. Yeah. So how they perceive the stressor in their life, because, we've talked about this before, you can have 2 people who, like, let's say, for example, Marissa and I, if we were working for someone, we get fired, and Marissa starts being like, oh my gosh, I'm fired. Where's my income going to come from? This is the worst thing ever. Oh my gosh. I don't know what I'm going to do. And she just freaks out, and her stress levels are super high. Whereas maybe something like that happened to me, I'd be like, awesome. I hated that job anyway. This is a fresh start. I can't wait. There are going to be so many more opportunities for me. I can't wait to start the job process and find something that's going to be even greater. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. So you have the same stressor, but you have 2 people who perceive it in very different ways. So that is something that I'll talk to a lot of my clients about, is like, can you view this differently? Is there any way that you can try to not stress about this as much? And that helps a lot. And not only that, but just kind of how you view everything. And that can really help a lot. And then, that oftentimes there are things that they just suck. There's no other way around it. It's just like, this sucks. But you can still kind of have a little bit of a better attitude towards it and kind of have this like, well, yeah, this is a setback, but this is a challenge. This is just something else for me to overcome. And then there are times where, you know, you're juggling a lot. Maybe like we talked about before, if you're a new mom, you're going to be in a phase where you're stressed and there's not really
and not sleeping.
Right. You're not sleeping, you're stressed, you know, you're having all of this huge life change. You're trying to navigate, you know, this brand new life in your world. And there's not really a whole lot we can do. It's not just like, oh, we'll just hire a nanny or just do this. You're going to be in a more stressful time. So Marissa and I will come say, hey, well, instead of trying to track your macros, because that is adding even more stress to your life, let's dial it back. Let's see if we can just focus on some healthy habits this week. Let's see if you can talk to your husband a little bit more, communicate your needs and let him know that you need this during the day, or just things that we'll try to help with. So I think it really varies per client, and there are so many different stress situations that we need to evaluate, and a lot of different ways that you can tackle it. So yeah, I really do think that that's something we can make a whole episode on.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like kind of from what you just said, though, we can take number one, can you reframe the situation? So can you take your stressor, pause instead of, and this is something I talk about a lot, is instead of reacting, can you respond? So reactions are like our instinctual, impulsive, quick reactions to stuff, but can we like pause and think about how we want to respond? How would, you know, that higher version of ourself respond to this situation that we're trying to become, right? And so can we take that extra second to stop ourselves from like snapping back or, you know, totally shutting down in the moment, and like really evaluating how we want to respond to this. And that oftentimes comes with reframing the situation in our mind, because if we want to respond in a way that's appropriate or more productive, a lot of times we kind of have to flip the script in our mind. And so like reframing is super, super powerful. And then like, even if it's a super shitty situation, like just can we try to keep under control what we know we can't, right? And so it's like maybe there's all these things that have fallen out of our control and it's crazy, and you know, it's just a very unfortunate situation, whatever it might be. What can you control? You know, is it the fact that you can still take stress out on the gym? Is it the fact that you can still drink water? Is it the fact that you can still prepare your own meals? Is it the fact that you can journal for 5 minutes in the morning to try to get some of that out, right? So I don't know what it is, but you have to kind of ask yourself, like, what can I do to kind of hold on to something during this stressful time? Because a lot of times that will be what gets you through. I know a lot of people where the gym is what gets them through a lot of really crazy, stressful, shitty times, because it's something that can be a constant for you and you can turn to relieve stress at and all of those things. So there's no one right or wrong answer to stress management. On the surface level, it's like if you kind of just have a stressful lifestyle, like shift work, for example, or 24-hour nursing or firefighting, for example, they do 24-hour shifts, at least in this area. So any of those sorts of things, like if you have like a stressful occupation, ashwagandha is a great one for like if you need to just like kind of overall get your body's response to calm down, even if you don't necessarily feel stressed. I'm that type of person where like I don't feel stress, I don't perceive stress very much. Like it's very rare that I'm like, I'm gonna have a nervous breakdown, like, and I don't really often. And I'm pretty good at reframing and just seeing things in the better light, or like, hey, this is good stress or whatever. But like if I'm still physically stressed, my body is having a stress response and I'm not acknowledging it, that's something that like ashwagandha could still help. So that is something where it's like your body's stress response can come down. That can help. Better sleep can help. And of course, exercise, proper nutrition can help. So just kind of like identifying where you're at on that spectrum, I think, because I don't think we brought up the me type of person who likes like, oh, I'm juggling 80 different things. Oh, I'm good. What are you talking about?
I'm fine. Everything is fine. Yeah. So you might have someone, again, like Marissa was saying, that the gym is what saves them from being stressed. And then you might have another person where you're like, hey, let's just take 2 days off. Like no gym, no cardio, like let's just focus on recovery, get some extra sleep. instead of trying to cram in a gym session. And oftentimes we'll see just a little bit of rest can go a really long way. So of course it doesn't mean like, oh, well, the gym is what's stressing me out, therefore I shouldn't go anymore. But sometimes just taking like a nice little reset, spending a little bit of time, getting some extra sleep. Maybe you have now some extra time to meal prep and get all your food ready for the week or something. It's just taking something off your plate and then kind of reevaluating and see where to go from there.
Yeah. For example, I slept until 9 today, not because I wanted to, because my body said you need to.
Yeah. I don't even remember the last time I've slept in past.
I don't either. That's the crazy part. Okay. Meal distribution. So this is one, it's kind of like when we were talking about adherence, we kind of talked about like, you want that consistency, not only in your day-to-day total macros or whatever, but you want to be eating meals across the day. You don't want to be hoarding all your food for the evening or whatever. And yeah, so we really want to make sure that we just have like consistency in our, not only our meal distribution across the day, but like our food quality as well. So like relying primarily on all processed foods is most likely not going to be the best thing for us or our results. And even if we can see progress while doing that, just kind of like the Pop-Tarts and protein shakes example, like our satiety is going to suck. Like unless you're in a position where you're trying to gain weight, which is not what this episode's about, like there's probably less situations where you need to be force feeding yourself highly processed foods to get calories in, more situations where you're actually going to want to swap those things out for stuff that's more nutrient dense, fibrous, and have higher water content to keep you fuller for longer. So that would be something else to think about: food quality, food volume, if you're really hungry, and then making sure that that's spread well across the day.
Yeah, I do have clients who, again, they'll start to pick up after some time together, where they understand that if they have a very large meal or if they save a majority of their food towards the end of the day, that the next morning they will see a higher number on the scale. And it's not because they did anything wrong. It's just normally they just have a higher volume of food in their stomach that hasn't been digested yet. So that's something to think about too. So just making sure that you are spreading your meals out so you're not having a majority at the end of the day, because that can kind of skew data. And I also think that it doesn't typically help with digestion if you have so much food in your stomach before going to bed. So just something to think about. But yeah, Marissa made a lot of really good points.
Yeah, I think one more thing on stress is just like the whole like doing so much in the gym. There is a point where you do too much, and that is extra stress on the body. So like you said, you were talking about like, a day or two of rest, or maybe it's the whole plan, right? If this person is doing an hour of cardio a day, they're training 6 days a week and they're not seeing progress, another plateau breaker could be, what if we trained 4 days a week? And what if instead of doing intentional cardio, like running, for example, we just walked and hit a step count instead that equated that? I've done that with a few clients. It brings down inflammation tremendously and stress on the body tremendously. So that's one where it's like scaling back can also be a plateau breaker, and it falls under the umbrella of stress management, because all stress, whether it's from the gym or mental stress, is all cumulative. So that's something to think about, especially if you're someone who does work out a lot, but you're also in a stressful time in your life. That could be a reason for a plateau too. So I wanted to quickly touch on that.
Because a lot of times we think, oh, well, if I'm not seeing any results, I need to do more. So instead of 6 days, we need to do 7. And instead of an hour, we need to do 2 hours. Like, so we always have this, I need to do more. I need to eat less. So sometimes doing the opposite can really help. So I think that's a really good transition into like, all right, well, I know that I've plateaued. I'm, everything is adherence is great. Sleep is great. Neat's great. All this stuff is great, but I've plateaued. So what do I do? So again, it's going to vary per individual. And a lot of times as coaches, we will make a guess, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be right. So we might say, hey, let's try this and see what happens. So let's say you try one of these things and it doesn't work. That doesn't mean that it didn't work for you, or that your body's broken. It might just be like, hey, well, we just need to figure something else out. So a couple different things that we'll try with our clients are diet breaks. So this might be 2 days, it might be a week, it might be 2 weeks, depending on how a client responds, where we will scale back cardio and we will implement in some more food. So again, it just depends on how you are responding, but it's just giving your body a little bit of a break, a little bit more rest. And then we might implement refeeds. And so I feel like in the beginning, Marissa and I used to do 1-day refeeds. And I think that data has shown that 2-day refeeds are a little bit more beneficial. So we might have you do 5 days of lower macros, and then on Saturday, Sunday, or whatever day you kind of prefer, we might implement some higher carbs, maybe lower fat, a little bit lower protein. But just trying to see if we can have fat loss kind of almost like restart, and see if any changes are made on the scale. And then we might even implement some reverse dieting. Like, hey, let's spend a little bit of time, not just a short refeed or a short diet break, but let's actually reverse diet. And sometimes a client will respond extremely well to that higher food.
Yeah. The conversation about diet breaks and refeeds is actually very interesting in the research. And it's almost to the point, and this is like, I think Eric Trexler, Eric Helms, and there's a researcher that Eric Helms interviewed that I can't remember his name, but he's focusing specifically on diet breaks and refeeds. But it's interesting because it's almost looking like it's purely psychological, rather than this magical physiological thing that's happening when we're doing a refeed. Very, very interesting. The research is new. They're still doing studies on it. We don't have proof to show that it's all mumbo jumbo, and they are effective in practice. And so I want to get that very clear, but I think it's really interesting how much a psychological break can affect someone in a dieting phase and really benefit them. So yeah, refeeds, especially refeeds, the conversation around those is like, it really is kind of just a matter of like spreading across your total weekly calories for some high days, some low days, and just like, how does that impact the psychology of energy, the psychology of drive to do more, the psychology of feeling like you caught a break, and being able to be refreshed. Really interesting. I'm not going to say too much more on it because, again, I'm not super well versed in it, but they do work in practice. They're really great tools. But then, diet breaks and refeeds, if those things are not working, if you are doing them pretty regularly in a fat loss phase and you're still stalled out, then we talk, okay, how do we enter this reverse diet? And it's really in that situation again, where it's like, okay, probably have like 5 more pounds that you want to lose or something like that. And it's like the psychological toll of like, is it worth it for all of this more sacrifice for 5 pounds? When again, I said, you're probably pretty content with where you're at this point. So like, maybe that's the reason why you're going off track on the weekends and not seeing that final result, right? So a number of things there. So really what we want to look at is, is it time to switch gears? And like, is it really urgent enough to where like you need to push through? If it's that last 5 pounds, for example, or the opposite is, I actually am thinking of someone I talked with yesterday, a client. He came to me, we've been working together for about a year. But when he came to me, he said, I've been trying to lose this weight lose, regain, for 10 years. And so we're on year 11 of like chronic dieting here. And so we've been seeing some success with consistency and managing our variables and trying out all of these things. Like, he is so resilient. And I really admire just like his ability to continue to stick to the plan, no matter how slow the progress is. It's crazy. But we recently decided yesterday to start reverse dieting, because he has never taken a chance to focus on maintaining instead of losing, or just absolutely like F it. So really interested to see how that goes, because it's a very new thing. And so that's the other end of the spectrum, is if it's just 5 pounds left and it's just not worth it anymore, or you still have some more weight to lose that you think is a decent chunk, but like you've just been doing this for so long, it really will benefit to commit to a reverse diet, even for just a few months, just to see how your body responds.
Yeah. So I think it's important here, like, if your body is not responding, or you're really struggling to lose those 5 pounds, it's kind of like, where's your quality of life? And is dieting just become your entire day. It's all you think about. It's, you're becoming obsessed, and it's, you're doing hours of cardio in the gym, and you're not eating a lot of food, and you can't enjoy date nights, and you can't go to any social events because you just feel so restricted. Well, are those next 5 pounds, are they worth it? Are they really worth it if you're not enjoying life right now? So having those conversations with a coach or a friend and figuring out, like, is it worth it to keep going? Maybe you have a wedding coming up, and then, yeah, those 5 pounds are worth it to you. Or, it's like, hey, I've got vacation coming up in 5 days, or 5 days, 5 weeks or something. Maybe I want to keep going. Or it's like, what, I really don't have anything coming up. This sucks. I want to just reverse diet and get back to a place where I feel good and can maintain my results, but also enjoy a little bit more flexibility and freedom.
Yeah. So that's like the point where you have to dig deep. It's like, is it worth it? If so, you need to commit. Like, you need to decide that it's worth it in that moment and commit to that decision for the next however long. It's really hard to do in that position. And then the other thing I'll say is, so there's that psychological, is it worth it? And then it's like, okay, the turning point physiologically, are you exhibiting symptoms of metabolic adaptation? So go back and listen to that episode with Dr. Eric Trexler, because it's a really great one. But like, are you having excess fatigue? Are things just not working the way that they should with your body? Do you feel just like overly sluggish? Like, do you think that there's probably like some hormonal dysregulation going on? Like, you can kind of feel when things are off. And if you can't feel it, then like others will notice it for you. So if you have people telling you that you feel, you look run down, you look tired, you're not, the same personality wise that you were, those are all signs and symptoms that, like, okay, one, definitely time to up your calories. Two, let's get some labs done. Like, let's just look at things. And like, of course, here's the thing too. It's like, if your labs are off in a position like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that like you're screwed and you need to do hormonal health care or anything like that. A lot of times those things are solved with higher calories and staying at those higher calories for a while. So, get labs done, get them checked again after you've been in maintenance for a little bit, and make sure that things are all back to normal at that point. That's when you really want to like make that decision of like, are you ready to diet again after? But, get some labs done, like see if anything's really out of whack, reverse diet, and then just live at maintenance for a bit. Like, just live there for a little while. Enjoy what it's like to be that weight and to not be restricted with food, and to be able to hang out there, fluctuate within a range of like 3 or 4 pounds, maybe around a certain midpoint, and just chill there. And like, that might be necessary to see successful dieting in the future, to get to whatever that bigger end goal is for you. And it's really like a bigger cycle than just, 6 months or 3 months or 6 weeks of dieting. It's really like, this is, if you have big goals for yourself, or you have been on this journey for a while, this is a lifelong endeavor. You're always going to be getting better. If you're not moving forward, you're going to be moving backwards. So like, why not always take steps to keep moving forward? Just keep defining what that is, each phase moving forward.
Yeah. So we have 2 episodes that we've done. We've done the maintenance mindset, and we've also done a whole podcast on reverse dieting. So I would recommend listening to those if you're like, hey, yeah, I probably should get to a point where I'm increasing my intake. Then those are 2 really good episodes to listen to.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, not really. I don't have too much else. Do you think there's anything we're missing with reversing that we should cover?
No, I don't think so. Cause I mean, start to reverse diet. So we've talked about that, just real short. It's the process of reverse dieting. So instead of slowly decreasing your calories, you're now slowly increasing your calories. You're going to be decreasing cardio. And again, it's not all at once. It's not very abrupt, but it also kind of depends on how you're feeling. If you're extremely run down, you might need to increase a little bit quicker. But if you are in a really good spot, you can do it a little bit more conservatively. So it really depends on your individual situation, how you're feeling. But to slowly over time increase your food, decrease cardio, and get to a point where you feel good kind of hanging out and maintaining that physique or that weight for a while.
Right. And I think 2 things about reverse dieting that are important to kind of finish off this episode and bring it full circle is, one, reverse dieting does not mean that you're reversing your progress. It means that you are upping your food, downing your cardio, but the goal is to maintain, within a pretty close range of wherever your endpoint was with your the end of your diet. Now, when you increase carbs bring water into the cell. So you might see a pound or two of increase just from having more carbs in your system and not being depleted. But beyond that, the goal really is weight maintenance, because if you are in a deficit, increasing your calories to a certain extent is not going to cause you to gain weight, because reverse dieting is literally the process of like taking steps from biggest point of deficit to no deficit, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're entering a surplus. Now, if you do start gaining a bunch of weight with every single increase, that's when we need to look at those labs, hormones, what's wrong here, because that's not a typical or normal response. If it's like rapid weight gain as soon as you up your calories a tiny bit, and especially in the context of something that's like should still be a deficit. So that's something to keep an eye on. And then the second thing is like just a bigger picture perspective on reverse dieting. If there's anything that's like a really great plateau breaker, it's the long-term, playing the long game with a reverse diet. So, reverse dieting and dieting again from your new maintenance point that's lower than you started, and getting past that plateau the next time you decide to diet. So playing the long game really is your best friend when it comes to plateau breaking and making sure you're not chronically dieting year after year, month after month. And really taking the time to reverse, live at maintenance, and then have dedicated fat loss phases sprinkled in there rather than the other way around.
Right. I think that is probably if you can pull anything from this episode, it would be that we want to spend more time not dieting than dieting. That is going to be the biggest help for you. And so another thing I wanted to point out just real quick about reverse dieting is there are hyper responders, whereas once you start increasing your food intake, decreasing cardio, that you have clients that will just start to drop weight, and they seem to respond extremely well to this, but that is not typically what happens with most clients. Most clients will either maintain, and which is great. That's still a great outcome if you're able to maintain your weight with higher food. And maintain their physiques. And then what will happen most of the time is, you'll gain a little bit of weight. And so Marissa and I are those people who gain weight. So do I wish I was a hyper responder? Absolutely. It'd be great to eat more food and lose weight, but I don't respond that way. So I have some clients who will come to me, and even after explaining the process of reverse dieting, they still feel like they're doing something wrong if they gain weight, or they're not, reverse dieting doesn't work for them. So I just want to point that out there, that there are a lot of different ways that you respond, but it is not bad if you're able to maintain, or even if you put on a couple pounds. It doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong, or it didn't work for you, or you just can't have a higher carb intake.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point to finish off on, with just expectations. I've seen it with myself, like the start of a reverse, I'll lose a little weight at the beginning. I typically get really optimistic at that point where I'm like, ooh, I am hyper responding. And then after 3 weeks, I'm like, oh no, we're good. It's just me having more energy for 3 weeks. And now we're back to normal. But yeah.
So I think this was a really good episode. And I hope that you guys really enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. And if you guys ever have any topics or anything that you guys want us to touch on, definitely let us know. We love being able to give information that you find super relevant. But other than that, I don't think I have anything else.
Yeah, I'm good.
So awesome. So we hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. You can find both of us on Instagram. You can find me at Chrissy Lynn Fit, and Marissa is at Marissa Roy Fitness. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we hope to see you back next week.